Okay, before we get started, we're going to do a quick audience poll, which is we are going to vote on whether it is better to have me here, where I can see all of you and I am not behind the monitor, although I don't know how well people in the back can see, or here, where I feel like I'm disappearing if I move. So, show of hands, down. I know. And up. All right, up has it. Okay. What? I know. See, well, that's the thing. That's the importance of listening to customers. Because inside our own heads, we see things the way we see things, which is not always 100% accurate. So, hello, I'm Cindy Alvarez. The people who are right there, I am sorry, I'm not going to see you very well, but the rest of you, looks like we have a good mutual line of sight. If anyone wants to move, feel free. My name is Cindy Alvarez. I am a principal design researcher in the developer division at Microsoft, and that will show slides? It will not show slides. Yep. What are we? Yep. What is that? Ah, look at that. All right.
There we start your slideshow.
Yep. Oh, from the beginning. Ah, there we go. All right. So, we're going to talk today about addressing cognitive bias in product feedback. And I say product, but this is really bias everywhere with your teammates, with our customers, with everything, because we're humans and we're all subject to these things. So what are we going to do about this? I'm going to start off by telling you a story. And this is, how many of you have ever been staying at a hotel and you lost your hotel key? Yeah. So what happens typically is, at least for me, I never discover it right when I leave. It's always when I get back at the end of the night and I am tired and I've gone up and I'm schlepping my stuff. And I'm like, ah. Then you got to go back downstairs. I don't have my key. And then they're always like, do you have ID? And I'm like, my ID is in my room. So there's this long, convoluted process, and it's incredibly annoying. And I think for me, at least, the problem is the key is something new that I have to deal with. And I'm used to dealing with my car keys and my phone and my laptop and these things, but the hotel room key is just one more addition. And any women in the room may recognize that our clothes don't always have pockets, and so that presents its own challenge, especially when it's not jacket weather. Although splitting my time between San Francisco and Seattle, it's mostly jacket weather. So what do we do about this? We might think that, I mentioned the things that I keep track of. One of them is my phone. I always have that. So maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should put a key card on my phone, because I always have it. And if I don't, I realize immediately that I don't. It's like a missing limb. That's how a lot of product ideas start, is we see a problem and we jump to the solution really fast, because that's the fun part. That's why we have these jobs, is we like to build things. Unfortunately, there's a lot that elides over. And like the can I see you, can you see me scenario, our view of the world is a little bit limited. So being part of Microsoft, we have customers all over the world in different industries with different needs. So do all of you. The thing is that even though we have different feature needs, we're all playing by the same human brain rules. We all have the same ways that our brains process and take in information and ignore what we don't like. And that's essentially cognitive biases. And this impacts the questions that we ask, what people answer, and how we choose to hear the things that we answer. It's something that has kept all of us alive. Every person in this room is alive because your ancestors had cognitive bias, and that kept them from eating the poison berries or going to pet the woolly mammoth or venturing out on their own onto that thin ice. And congratulations, they all did this. They all pattern matched, and they looked around to see what everyone else was doing, and that kept them safe, and that's why we're here today. But those same biases and shortcuts make it really bad to make nuanced decisions like building products, starting new companies, that other people will want to use and pay us money for and invest their time in learning. So we need to figure out how to get around them. We can't turn them off, but there are some hacks that work for getting around cognitive bias. And so before we start, and I jump into the rest of it, I would like everyone to take out paper, pencil, laptop, phone, some sort of thing that you can record, and write down why you're here. And you don't have to share it right now, although if you'd like to email me, that's also cool. I'm cindy@microsoft.com, because I'm always curious about these things. You're at this session because you want to be able to do something, you want to get better at something. What is that? So just take a minute and write it down. I'll be here. Yeah. Will this be recorded is a question. My guess is no, since I don't see a camera either. Yeah. There we go. So the slides are up in the build database in the cloud. And there will also be, all of the questions that I talk about will be available. If you email me, I will send them back out to you.
Just so you know, it's translating you up there badly.
Interesting. I suspect that is something for accessibility, and so I am loath to turn it off, even though it is terrible. Yeah?
Your audio is going to a human who's typing it in.
All right. Well, you know, human intelligence, artificial intelligence, neither are perfect yet. We'll get there. All right. So why did I ask you to do this? Because of hindsight bias. And that's a way that we rationalize what happens along the way. And we tend to say, like, hey, I knew it all along. So at the end of a project, we all feel pretty happy with ourselves because we shipped something. We're like, hey, we're good at this after all. And we tend to forget that we changed scope a bunch of times and we wiped out a database and we made a bunch of people mad and our bosses yelled at us and we had to work on Saturdays. All those things kind of go out the window because we post-process rationalize them. And so this actually means you came into this talk hoping to get something out of it, and then I have to entertain you at the end. You might not notice that you hadn't learned what you wanted to learn. So we're actually going to go back to the things you wrote down towards the end, because I would like you all to leave happy and a little bit smarter than you came in here, which is a high bar because you all came in here very smart. So think about hindsight bias and what it causes us to do. It causes us to think that whatever the end result was what we intended. And a lot of times this means with projects that we end up with something that, even though there's been a lot of action, there maybe hasn't been as much impact as we had initially hoped. And I think in terms of, to name drop a competitor, think about Amazon Prime. If they had started with, okay, it typically takes 7 days to get something you ordered, let's work really hard and get it down to 5. That would be good, but it wouldn't be the sort of amazing that makes people say, like, of course I'm gonna subscribe to Prime, I'm gonna buy everything. It's not that kind of game changer. And the same thing with things like software, where we want things to just work. And if it almost just works, that means it doesn't just work. And we tend to curse at our screens a little bit because we wanted it to be a little bit better. So this notion of kind of working backwards is actually what they call it at Amazon, where they write down what they want to achieve and then they set about achieving it. It's a good thing to do for any kind of project, whether you're building a new product or you're trying to revamp a process within your company. And so this is something that, within my role, I do a lot of seeing someone who's starting to embark on a project and saying, like, once you've succeeded, what like? And we don't always know, but by taking that guess, we have a stronger North Star to move towards. This is the kind of status that I love to get. And all the purple is what I have excerpted out into something that I can send to you. So all the purple backed slides. If you take notes of this format week by week or bit by bit throughout a project, you end up with a great sort of story of what really happened that contradicts that hindsight bias we all have. We started this week believing this. Here's what we learned, especially here's where we were wrong. And here's how we're adjusting based on that. This can be 3 bullet points. This is also, if you do status updates, something that your team might actually read, as opposed to a page-long email that we all put in a folder and say that we're going to look at later, and then we really don't. Do this week by week. It's really tempting now to do project management digitally and overwrite the previous week. That's getting rid of this useful evidence. So put these in separate files. They're really useful to look at later. Part of the reason we do this is because we're going to run into a bunch of other cognitive biases along the way. And the next one is cognitive dissonance. And it's a really uncomfortable feeling when we have two contradicting ideas in our head and they seem like they can't possibly both be true. And years ago, I worked on an online bill pay app. And we thought it was pretty good. We designed it internally, we'd all used it, it seemed like it just worked great. And when we did usability testing, the people we brought in also thought it worked great. They moved through the app, they clicked the right buttons, they put in the right amounts at the end, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, I would totally use this. Everyone was very happy until they released it and found that adoption was bad and continued usage was even worse. So here we have two ideas that are fighting against each other. We're good product designers, and customers don't like this product we designed. And what's tempting is to look for kind of a way out. And so I actually had folks I was working with at this bank say, maybe customers just aren't ready for this. Maybe they don't get it, which is a polite way of saying maybe the customers are dumb. But that's what our brains are thinking. This is not actually a malicious action. It's a way to relieve this tension between how can these things possibly both be true. Is it the user's fault? No. But thinking that relieves the pressure on us. And then everyone breathes a sigh of relief because that feels better. But it doesn't actually teach us anything useful. It doesn't teach us why. Even if customers weren't ready, there's a reason for that. Why aren't they ready yet? What is the thing that is holding them back? And that's the kind of thing we need to get at if we're going to build products that actually work and make people's lives better. The thing that works, interestingly enough, is just set one of those bits to true. So essentially to say, okay, let's just assume whichever thing is the least good is true. Let's just assume we didn't create the best bill pay app out there. Now what do we do? This works great in internal meetings, by the way, and someone will always say, yeah, but we did, like, I know, but just for a minute, we're going to assume that this thing is true, that we didn't create the best bill pay app. Now what? It sounds like a semantic hack, and it actually works amazingly well because it lets that tension dissipate, and it lets us actually say, this is a challenge, this is a problem to be solved, what should we do? Our brains respond much better to stories than binary, and we can actually think about how are these things both true. So in the case of this bill pay app, we can look at what people are doing, we can see what they were trying to do, what their expectations were, and maybe there was a mismatch there. These things can both be true. But what if we had a problem that we thought, this is the root of it? We're convinced it's because X. We run into another thing, which is confirmation bias, which is that we look for evidence that proves us right, and we avoid or we ignore evidence that is contradictory. So, these customers just aren't tech savvy enough. We might look at, oh, well, this person's running a 486. That dates the project, right? So surely they're not ready for online bill pay. We might ask things like, are you worried that paying your bills online could go wrong? How's everyone going to respond to that? Yeah, right? Do you have concerns about bank security? These are all questions that I was asked to ask customers, by the way. And they answered exactly as you would expect. Yes, I'm worried that online bill pay might go wrong and then I would get a late fee. Yes, I am kind of worried about the online security of my bank. I don't even really understand what it is, but I'm worried about it. Don't you feel like writing checks is just easier? Yeah, I know how to do that. And so when you ask that sort of question, you're going to get exactly the answer you're looking for. It validates exactly what we wanted to think, or what we wanted to think, which is these people just don't get it. That's the way that we want to ask these questions. But instead, we want to go more open-ended. And this is tough, especially in a world where we often have a lot of metrics that we're asked for. We want to hear 20% this, 9 on a scale of 10. But that's not very helpful. So tell me about how you're currently doing this. What we actually did is call up banking customers who had signed up for online banking and logged in a few times and said, walk me through how you're paying your bills today. So here's what would happen. When it was their real bills, they would log in, and I wasn't even watching them, on the phone with people who were logged in, and they were narrating. So they would log in, and they would start to type something in, and they go, oh, I'm navigating away now. Well, why? He said, well, I need to check my bank balance. Because if I'm going to pay bills, I need to know how much money I have. Oh, okay. So they'd check their bank balance, and then they'd think about it. And they'd say, well, but direct deposit's going to be on this day. So if I'm thinking about how many bills I'm going to pay, I'm thinking about how much money I have today, and when is my direct deposit going to come in, and when is that bill going to come out. There was an immense amount of calendaring that these people were doing offline, or they were navigating to another page and getting distracted and never coming back. So the straight up structure of the bill pay app was fine. It's just that we had completely failed to take into account that most people who are living paycheck to paycheck have a lot of thinking to do before they get to that screen. We actually ended up solving this at least some degree by having a projected bank balance where you could input when your direct deposit was, and we would estimate, and there's a big asterisk, of course, for legal reasons, but it made people feel tremendously better. This is how much money I have today. This is how much money I will probably have on the 16th. Now I can fill these slots in it and push that submit button. Never would have gotten that from asking people what they wanted, because it was an almost unconscious behavior. Of course, I have to look at my bank balance. And of course, this screen doesn't seem like, there's a neat little grid with my bills listed. Where does bank balance fit into that? Except that it did, absolutely. So, yeah.
So what you're doing in order to describe this whole participatory design?
Yeah, so he's asking, is this participatory design? In this case, we weren't designing together, but yeah, design thinking, participatory design, customer development, customer discovery, these all overlap really heavily. It's essentially, what are people trying to do and how can we help them get there? And so our first run at building this app there was no participation. We just said people need to pay bills. Let's make it look really nice. Let's make the text clear. And that's not enough. It's not enough for any of us. So that's how we get things out. So show of hands. Programming language poll. We're going to do a survey here. So we're all going to recognize bias implicit in this, but we're going to go ahead. Favorite programming language? A. Show of hands. 2. Awesome. Okay. B. Few more. C. A lot. Okay. So we know who the audience is here. D. Still a good number of D. You know why you would bother to say that? Because you all care. Presumably a lot of you actually write code, and therefore you don't want to be labeled as a .NET, C#, C++ person, because maybe you're a Python person through and through, or you're a Go person, and you really need the record to be set straight that you are not one of these above. I would also be a D myself. But what if it's something that you don't necessarily care about? Like maybe it's vague, it's kind of in your division, I don't know, like you're not going to get a bonus based on this. This is what a lot of surveys look like. It is companies asking questions where the people responding don't feel that strongly about any particular option, and so we tend to just pick A, B, or C, right? One of those, yeah, I'm sure we care about automated testing. I'll pick C, right? I am not involved with this. I also don't care enough to write in a response. This is what happens with a ton of surveys. It doesn't mean that surveys are bad, but it means that if you're going to send them, you should have a really strong sense for what are the important questions to ask and what are the likely array of responses that you're going to get. I live in San Francisco. If I'd sent out this survey, people would have, we probably would have written in, but they also would have been like, who is this person? Like San Francisco programmers are all going to pick D, just at least all the ones I've ever worked with. So surveys can be a really great tool. We overuse them, and we use them prematurely because typically we do them before we know what we should be asking and what people are actually going to answer. And the thing is that people will answer the questions that you ask, and they very rarely will say, but wait a second, I don't really care about that. You should ask me about this other thing over here. And so when you think about things like user voice or kind of popular and public feedback requests, once someone says something, it gets upvoted or downvoted, but it's actually really hard to go add another idea. You've got a bunch of clicks, you've got to think, you've got to write things out. Most people don't go to that effort. They just kind of choose from the things that are there, and that may not be anything that people care that much about at all. So, in World War II, Center for Naval Research wanted to reduce the number of planes they were losing. Planes are very expensive. Sending them out, getting them destroyed is no good. And so they looked at the planes that were coming back and they studied where the bullet holes were, and they said, let's put more armor here so the planes will last longer. Does anyone see why this is a problem?
Well, one, it adds weight. Two, that hole may not be matter.
They came back with bullet holes, and those bullet holes are in areas that don't care.
That's right. So, survivorship bias. If you got shot somewhere else, your plane probably didn't come back. And therefore, if we put armor over these places, we're likely missing the things that would actually bring people home alive. And there was a statistician, Abraham Wald, who pointed this out, like, hey, we can't just slap armor on everywhere, but maybe we should think about the spaces that are not hit by bullets. And he actually did testing to make sure that we weren't just slapping armor everywhere, but putting it in the places that mattered that hadn't been bullet holed.
Maybe it's more fundamental how we know it's about bullets in the first place. Maybe it's an engine.
Ooh, another dimension. So how do we even know it's about bullets? Right, so maybe the failures are coming from other places as well. It could also be true that the planes that are not coming back, something else happened, something overheated. There could be entirely different reasons why pilots are dead somewhere that we don't know about because they didn't make it back. How that manifests for most of us is what I call happy customer bias, which is we're all really glad when we have lots of happy customers. That's awesome. We all work really hard towards that. And also, if we are primarily leaning on that source of people to get feedback, then we risk missing out on the things that drove away our people who used to be our customers, and they're preventing the rest of the world from adopting our technology. And to some degree, being Microsoft, we're a little bit lucky that our existing customers are pretty huge. And also, there are a lot of people out there in the rest of the world not using our stuff yet. And so happy customers they're easy to talk to, frankly. We're on the phone with them already. We have account managers talking to them. They tend to call us. They submit customer support requests. They ask for things. The availability is there. It's easy to ask them things. It's actually much harder to get someone on the line who just quit your service because they're like, oh, this is just going to be a sales call. I've given up. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Non-customers, why should they even bother, right? If someone's happy with a competitor, why should they talk to us? It's difficult, but we have to do it because otherwise we miss out on this huge swath of information. So I mentioned I live in San Francisco. All the developers I've worked with in my career, primarily non-Microsoft stack. And that's part of the reason why I have a job is I talk to these people all the time because I want to understand what are you using today, what works for you, what do you like about it, are there any Microsoft tools you like, which ones? What do you like about them? Why are you choosing this and not this? How does it meet your needs? What I really want to see is not just features. People will tell me, oh, I use this thing on Amazon, I use this thing on Google. That's fine. But what I really want to see is what is the capability that's unlocking? What does that make you feel like you're able to do? How confident is your team because of this thing you can do? And so we want to ask those kinds of questions. And the populations we can often look at are customers with low usage or low satisfaction. So if you've got metrics, you can see that there's some bank of customers that's logging in maybe once a month, where everyone's logging in every week. The average median is logging in once a week. Maybe we talk to those once a month folks and say, it looks like you're not using the product that much. I'd love to see how we could help you get more value out of it. Maybe you could tell me how you're using it. How does it fit into your mental model? Maybe you'll discover that the reason they're only logging in once a month is because they had some goals over here that we're only thinly aligned with, or that they've already started using your competitor and here's why. Or there may be a feature that you already have that they didn't know about. Those are always easy calls because then you can say, hey, we can do this. Look, here it is right here. We can talk to non-customers, and I find the best way to get non-customers to talk to you is actually just to be really humble and say, look, I know you're not using our stuff and that's okay. I'm not going to try and talk you into it, but I would really like to understand why you like the tool that you are using. And when you really frame it in that way, when it's about you, your preferences, people are really willing to talk. And they don't feel that sort of sense of defensiveness of, I don't want to get into a feature argument with this person who's probably selling something. Those are no fun. People using competitor products, incidentally, are a great way to actually usability test. So you can find people using competitor products and just watch them use those. For that online bill pay app, the company I was working for then, we did this pretty regularly, is just go talk to people at other commercial banks and say, tell me about your experiences using this bank. And we would say, look, your competitors, their customers like these things and don't like these things. Which of these align with your product vision? You know, what makes sense for you to build in that will make people happier? It's an amazing source. And if you're new to building a product or a company and you literally don't have anything to put in front of people, you don't have anything to usability test yet, you don't have to wait until you've built a prototype. You can actually look at these analogs out there in the real world and learn a lot from them. The last thing, you know, getting back to actual customers and internal coworkers, is that a lot of times we need to give people permission to complain. And that may seem odd for anyone who's ever handled customer support and listened to angry customers, and you would think, surely we do not need to give anyone permission to do anything. And yet, there are lots of folks who don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily occur to them to complain. They might not feel okay about it. Culturally, some regions and cultures are more polite than others or defer to authority more. There are also the cases of things that it's not a bug, it's just a little weird. And honestly, with the age of apps and on-demand and instant gratification everything, that it's just kind of weird, it has driven me away from more apps, you know, just across the board. Because if it's something fast, I want it to work immediately. I'm not going to write some to-do list app maker of feedback saying, you know, when I pull down to refresh, it doesn't refresh quite fast enough. Or, you know, you always set the due date to right now, which never makes any sense. It's obviously going to be in the future. Why would I take the time to write that out? It's not a bug, it's just a weirdness. Now, if that app maker actually said, if there was one thing that bugged me, that bugged you about my app, what is it? Then I would respond. Well, yeah, you know, it's great, except whenever I put a to-do list task, you immediately set the due date to right now, which makes no sense because right now I'm putting to-do list tasks in my app. I'm not doing anything yet. You know, 10 minutes in the future at minimum, people. But it wouldn't occur to me. I wouldn't bother, whatever the reason is. So asking people, you know, if you had to change one thing about how you use this product, what would it be? You know, while you're going through the process of using this, are there tasks? Which tasks do you put off doing? Put off doing is actually a great other way to get at things that people don't like, because we mostly tend to procrastinate on that thing that's hard, that takes a lot of cognitive overhead, that there's a good chance of me screwing up. You know, if you're doing something on your phone, it's like, I gotta wait till I get back to my desktop. You want to minimize the tasks that people are like, I'm gonna focus on this later, because it usually means that they don't ever get to it. You know, and how have you done this differently in the past? So a lot of times people have used something else that they liked better, and it may be in a completely different context. You know, it was the 80s, it was a completely different company, it was a regulated industry, but there's still something that you can get out of that. What have you liked better in the past? What can we do about this? You look like you really want to say something, so I'm going to let you.
Actually, first, will we have a chance to complain in the end of the session? Like if we
Yes.
give answers?
Yes, you will have a chance to complain at the end of the session.
And one more. Did we hear in this particular slide is that a whole concept of trying to say one thing is maybe misleading, and maybe you want to have a completely different approach rather than just one thing to choose. An example with a to-do task is maybe I'm not interested in creating to-do tasks, but I'm interested about how I'm going to get those tasks afterwards.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat since none of you could hear this. One, will we have a chance to complain, aka ask questions at the end? Yes, absolutely. Two, the problem with one thing is that the approach entirely might be wrong. Maybe I don't need a to-do list at all, but I need some sort of better calendaring app. The one thing is great for an existing product. It is less great for I'm trying to create a new type of solution. That is correct. That is where, you know, the starting example about walk me through how you do bill pay, that's generally the kind of question I would start with. And so maybe how do you get things done? How do you make sure you get stuff done that you need to would be the kind of opening foray in which I might tell you about my to-do list woes, and you could ask follow-up questions, and you might conclude that I just need some Outlook plugins or something like that. So, as people who know our own products well, We also suffer from something called the curse of knowledge. And that means that once we have a fact in our head or a skill or a capability, we cannot remember what it was like to not have it in the past. This is why most product onboardings are terrible, because everyone who works on that product went through onboarding the first time a year ago and they don't remember anything about it. And then they also say, but people only go through it once. So we know the workarounds to our product. I mean, this is not just onboarding. In general, the people who work on products know them, our loyal customers know them, and we have internalized them to the degree that we forget that they are there. And sometimes we don't even complain about them for that reason. But sometimes the context changes when we're not looking. In fact, most of the time, things change. We don't really realize it. We might have the wrong starting assumptions. I've worked with customers over years that, over the course of 5 years, they could have moved from waterfall to agile. They could have moved into, continuous deployment. They could have moved from being a single office to a global office. Huge changes to how they do things. And they don't necessarily remember to tell us about that, or at least not to emphasize why it makes a big difference to us. And so my favorite hack, which is kind of ridiculous and yet it works, is just to add a new person who can ask the dumb questions. Because we all feel like, I probably shouldn't ask this customer that I've been working with for 5 years what their highest priority is. I mean, aren't I supposed to know that? It's really embarrassing. And as humans, we really hate looking dumb. And so we tend to avoid it, whether we mean to or not. And I have a story of when I joined a small startup, doomed to fail, but joined a small startup that had been going for about a year. Their biggest customer was the Wall Street Journal. They were very proud of this. Went into a meeting, my first meeting, all these Wall Street Journal people. It was a content recommendations engine. Not a particularly huge problem to solve. That was probably the real problem. But we walk into the meeting, there's a whole long meeting about our product, how happy they are, what they want in the next release. It's all very straightforward, the kind of meeting that we have all overheard a bazillion times. And at the end, I said, excuse me, this may seem silly, but I'm new to the team. I'm just hoping I could step back and ask a few questions. And one of them is, it seems like you're using the product now. I'm curious, what's the most valuable thing that we could do for you that would help your business? And they kind of stopped. And they said, oh. And they said, well, you're helping content, and that's great. But as a publisher, there's some content that we've monetized really, really well. And what we would love is if you could help us specifically get more traffic to those pieces of content. Don't send the things they're completely not going to be interested in, but can you kind of recommend this content that we're going to make more money on? And everyone else at my company just kind of stopped and stared, because no one had any idea that this was important. Because they never, as a content publisher, of course they know about impressions and CPMs and this is worth more than this. It was not obvious to a group of technologists. We'd never bothered to ask, and therefore we never knew. And we pivoted the entire product, probably bought that company another 8 months of runway. Again, it was going to fail anyways, but a thing that never would have come up had there not been a new person in the room. I have also played the new person on multiple projects. Sometimes I will lend myself out to be the new person, ask some fundamental questions, and then I magically exit the project, but now everyone is smarter. Highly recommend that. If you don't feel okay about that, this is a good use for new hires. So anyone who is new to your company, make it really, really clear that they should ask all the seemingly obvious questions, because everyone else in the room will thank them. And so similarly, when we talk to folks and we ask them things about a product and they've kind of remembered it, they kind of misremember it, they've got that curse of knowledge. Classic example, when I ask engineers about some of our software, was it difficult? How difficult was it to set this up? They say, oh, I figured it out. Like, I know you're an engineer, that's your job, but I'm happy that you figured it out, but what I want to know is, why did it take figuring out? This is an installation, a setup. It should have just been pretty easy, and for every one of you who stuck around and figured it out, there were probably 9 other people who cursed their screen and went to go use something else. But when you ask that, people don't always remember. And so if you flip it, one of my favorite questions is just to say, let's say you had a new coworker joining your team, and they were going to set up Visual Studio. What advice would you give them? And then suddenly the floodgates open. Well, download it over lunch because it's going to take a while. Get these workloads, don't get this one. I like this extension. Oh, we've got some templates here. Suddenly we remember. And this works for peers as well. This works, in a professional and consumer setting. It's just, what advice would you give someone else? Because we like to sound smart. It's the opposite of sounding dumb. We love that as humans. And so if you give someone a question that allows them to sound smart, then they will do it. And that's the only hack I've found to get around that curse of knowledge, is to force people back into that beginner's mindset. The first thing we learn tends to get stuck in our heads. So the concept of anchoring, it means that there's an early piece of information that will influence everything else that we hear afterwards. There's a great example where audience asked everyone the last 2 digits of their social security number. Let's say for non-US people, last 2 digits of your mobile number. Have them write it down, go away. Later on, you bring out a bottle of wine. You ask people how much they think it's worth. If the last 2 digits of your mobile were 07, you're more likely to say it's a $12 bottle of wine or something. If the last 2 digits of your mobile were 97, you're more likely to say, that's maybe a $50 bottle of wine. Nothing to do with each other. And yet just the notion that you have thought these numbers have put them in your head. And so the next time we ask you about a number, you get something that's closer. In the real world, the thing that affects us all the time means that once you have seen a demo of a product, then that is in your head and you're anchored on that demo, and all the feedback that you give from then on out is centered around having seen the world through this demo-shaped peephole, and so that you blocked out the rest of the universe. Once we show people something, that's what they're hooked on. So once we start talking about horses, we're never going to get to, faster horses, we're never going to get to the car. And so when you're talking to folks, even if you have an existing product already, it's really useful to start with these questions of, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? What's frustrating you today? And get those in as neutral an environment as possible. And then say, can we walk you through a demo? And then you can tell me how it's working for you. And then you've got a cross-reference as well, so that when someone has a comment about your demo, you know how well that jives with what they told you earlier. Because a lot of times if you have a demo that looks really nice, people like it, even though it doesn't really meet their needs. And if it looks maybe a little too slapdash, then you got people telling you that they don't like that color, or there's a typo over here, and that's not what you really care about either. Anchoring works together with loss aversion. So we really hate losing things. We hate losing things more than we like getting things. We're so sad about losing $5, much sadder than be happy about finding $5. And so what this means is that once we hear about a feature, we want it. Once we look at that user voice board and we see what that top vote getter was, we tend to think, well, of course the company should build this immediately. Why are they not doing it? That's why it's really hard to remove features. In some cases, it's because people are legitimately using them. In other cases, it's because it was mine and I don't want it to go away. And when we ask people if they want a feature, they will almost always say, yes, of course. And the reason and the result of this is that I have a washing machine with a grid of 16 buttons, of which I never use 14 because it doesn't make any sense. But I guarantee you that there was some ethnographer out there saying, would you like a super extra pre-soak option? And some consumer like me said, yeah, that sounds great. Except that now I have to over the burden of hovering over that bank of buttons every time. And so it's actually harder for me to use this product every time. It's probably more likely that it's going to break down because it has all these options. But if you just say, do you want something? Everyone says yes, because wanting is free. The building is not free, the maintaining is not free, and the user frustration later are not free. So if you ever hear me or someone like me respond to your feature request with, tell me a little bit how you do that, walk me through this process, I'm not really trying to put you off that feature. I just want to make really, really sure that it's a thing that's going to meet your needs before we build yet another washer button. So if you think about, what are people doing, not what they're saying, not do you want that pre-soak extra option button, but tell me how you handle laundry. And if you actually asked me that question, you would find out that I only use 2 settings, cold water wash for stains, because I have kids, and the super disinfectant setting, because I run marathons, and everything goes into one of those 2, because there's no happy medium in my house. If you ask some follow-up questions, you would probably also see that when do I do laundry? When I'm tired. And then I don't want to think about buttons. I just want this task to be done. And you could build something that I would be much happier with. And honestly, like my 2-button, don't have to think about it machine is the kind of thing that I would go evangelize in the streets. And every time I knew someone who moved into a house, I would be like, you have to get this washer. It will save your sanity. You can be, you can be drunk, you can be exhausted, you can be up in the middle of the night with kids who just woke up and throw a load in and it'll still turn out okay. And that's actually what we want. We want people loving our products so much that they effuse over them, even if the words they use sound not like words that our marketing department would have approved. Doesn't matter, because they get other people to buy that product. So we abstract up a level. How do you handle laundry in your house? Not how do you use the pre-soak button, but abstracting up that level gives you that whole piece of information. Laundry's maybe a little bit more straightforward. I think I've seen people do questions where they say something like, do you use Instacart? How do you use it? That is not all there is to grocery shopping. Like, who does this with grocery shopping? What do you do when you go grocery shopping? You look in the cupboards, you look in the fridge, you holler to everyone else in the house, does anyone need anything? Are we out of anything? You make a list, presumably, or maybe you don't, but you have in your mind the things you need. Then you go to the store, then you buy all the other things that look good, and if you're hungry, you buy things you don't need, and then you come home, and then you have to put it all away, and if you don't have a lot of freezer space, then you have to do like freezer Tetris. This is all part of the grocery shopping job to be done. And if we solve a little part of it, sure, I might change my behavior to use your tool instead, but humans really hate changing their behavior. We resist it really mightily. There's a Harvard Business Review article that claims that products have to be 9 times better for someone to replace A with B straight up. And I think what I've seen in my job is that with modernization, people moving from data centers to the cloud, always seems like people add on a project while they're doing it. And I think the reason is that just moving from data centers to cloud is not very satisfying. And so everyone wants to do something else while they're at it. And it's that same, if we're going to change behavior, we might as well get this other thing too. We might as well renovate, redesign. We might as well have a mobile version. We might as well, make it, put in our automated testing suite at the same time. So we want to know that whole process, because if we can take more of the problem off people's hands, they're really happy. How many people in this room have a regular exercise routine? How many people raised your hands because you felt like you should? Yeah. So, social desirability bias comes up in just about any time you ask people anything, really. We edit what we say to make ourselves look good. We don't usually realize that we are doing this. Sometimes we do. Often it's just, it manifests in a less obvious way. You ask someone who's like, oh, do you read? Yeah, of course I read. Do you work out? Yeah, of course. How many days a week do you work out? Oh, 7, 5. Right. How many days did you work out last week? 2. And it's, I actually do go to the gym most days. I was traveling last week, so that is not a true answer for last week. You could ask follow-up questions to figure out how normal is 2. There are lots of people who will say, 5 days, and it turns out normal is 1. If you think about that in terms of usage of a product, someone who does something every day, but maybe not really every day, you build for something that's not going to be true. And so one of the things is that social desirability bias is changes by environment. So if you ask a question about drinking, you're going to get a different answer on a college campus than you are in a workplace or a courtroom. In an environment, in an enterprise environment, no one reuses the same password ever. Everyone writes unit tests for everything. No one ever fudges their expense reports. None of these things happen. And the reason is that, if there's a yes/no question, there's almost always one answer that's clearly the socially preferable answer. You will look better if you say this. And so the easy solution here, well, easy in practice, a little harder to implement, is just don't ask yes/no questions. There's actually very little reason to ask a yes/no question, because at best, you will get an answer that is correct, but puts an end to the conversation. Do you use this? Yes. Now you got to like amp that conversation back up, like, okay, well, what do you like about it? What do you not like? If you say something like, tell me about how many times, then you're going to get something that's a more honest answer. So for example, something like, in the past month, when have you done this? Tell me about the times when this has happened. If you can ask a question in a way that implies that a non-zero answer is okay, then you will get those non-zero answers. Do you always do thorough code reviews? Yes, absolutely. Whereas if you were to say it like, look, in the past month, tell me about times when you didn't really have a chance to do a great code review. That implies like everyone, we all have these cases, and then people will still say zero if that's the truth. Like, actually, it's been a really good month. Like, we've been really good about code reviews. I think we were great. But you were more likely to get, oh, yeah, we had some downtime, so those fixes, we just pushed them out really fast. We just wanted to make sure they weren't going to break more stuff. Or, we're coming up to a release. We're coming up to build. We're coming up to something that's kind of crazy. Maybe this is new territory for us. Whatever that reason is, you want to kind of get at, there is a time when someone behaves non-optimally. These are the conditions that get them to do that. And then that gets you to how can we build a solution to fix that? And you don't get straight up answers out of this. People don't tell you this is how you fix this problem. That's our job as product and engineering people. We take all these inputs in and we can find solutions out of them, but we need to make sure that we've got that universe of what's happening. In the past month, when have you done this? How many times has this happened? And people will actually be honest when you frame questions in this non-judgmental way. Not just with potentially embarrassing things either, even with neutral topics, when you kind of give that when have you get this effect where people are remembering rather than inventing. And we're actually much more honest about recent memory. People actually tend to think like, okay, there was that time, there's this time, oh yeah, and this happened, versus kind of blurting out an answer that seems correct. And it's cognitive bias at work. Our brains think that something seems normal. It seemed okay to us. We're just going to go with it. But we want that more nuanced view. There might be a time where someone gives us an answer and we don't think it's correct. Or we see them doing something and it's clearly just wrong. They're doing it wrong. They're asking for something. We know that doesn't make any sense for them. But that does not work very well. So the backfire effect we saw spectacularly in American politics the last few years. I will say no more about it than that. When we have our beliefs, something that we perceive a feeling, and we all have feelings, even those of us who describe ourselves as being very rational, we have them, we just express them in different ways. When you present rational evidence against feelings, feelings always win. Sometimes they remanifest themselves as anger and people cursing you out and refusing to talk anymore. But we tend to reject hard evidence and believe even more strongly in that thing that we came in believing. And there are plenty of stories of like religious cults where the great leader was going to come down on this date and take everyone away to whatever the paradise or other planet, or unicorns are going to come in, whatever it is. And then that day comes and goes, and of course nothing happens. And what happens? Does everyone pack their bags and leave the cult and go back home? No! They all say something like, our faith wasn't strong enough, we'll have to believe harder, and then there'll be a new date. Or this is actually a reward for how strongly we did believe. We get to live another, whatever. They dig in tighter, they become even closer. And I have actually talked to a few people who have exited cults, and that is the behavior. When something threatens, everyone just digs in their heels. Hopefully none of us are actually dealing with cults in our customer products. Although you got to say, if one of them started using it, you'd get adoption across the board. So it might actually be a good business strategy. What you'll see this with customers is a customer who's angry because your product didn't work, and you ask them. Actually, I have a story from this recently. Is I was editing a PowerPoint folder file that I had downloaded, and it was in my temp folder, and I didn't realize that, and I was editing it happily over the course of like 2 days. And then I quit PowerPoint and the temp folder went away and was gone. I was very sad. And I relayed this story, and one of my friends was like, well, didn't you do save as? And I was like, see, now you're just pissing me off, right? And it's like, it's true, like rationally speaking, like that is the first thing you should do. You download a thing, you should save as, you should make sure that it's in the place where it's gonna be. You know, it shouldn't be on your laptop because then you're gonna go to work and not have it. Of course, rationally that is true. And yet in this moment, I was just angry, and hearing that just made me angrier and less willing to listen to anything else that person had to say. So when customers ask us things, they ask us something that makes no sense, and we say something like, well, I don't think you should need that, or, you know, are you using it the way it was specified? Or, you know, the polite version, which is, you know, oh, you might want to walk through this tutorial. Then they just get mad because you're implying that they are wrong, and right now they're just angry. So we're not going to get very far with that. So we think about an activity that we all think is rational. People putting out an RFP, choosing a vendor. We all do this based on features and functionality and value, right? We got a lot of Excel spreadsheets that tell us that. I mean, I've filled out a bunch of these. You check all the boxes, you count them up, whoever gets the most wins. Yeah. People compare features and options, right? And sort of. You'll get people who say things like, well, your competitor has this feature and you don't. And what do we do when someone says that? Well, if we're in anywhere connected to sales or wanting people to adopt it, our instinct is to say something like, but let me tell you how we're better. You know, but let me tell you what we do instead. And that actually just gets people to dig in their heels and be convinced that if they're being defensive, it must be for a reason. Maybe my instinct to go with this competitor is better after all. And so a lot of conversations I have seen, which could have been the opening to a let's find out why you care about this, end up with this kind of showdown of, well, I'm not going to sign unless you cut me a deal, which is not a productive conversation, because even if you end up winning that customer, you still haven't quite learned why it was they were unhappy in the first place. And again, that goes into that kind of thing where maybe they'll file a bug, except it's not really a bug, it's just a thing that's not quite right. And those things that are not quite right drive away a ton of customers. And so I'm a big fan of starting by agreeing. When you have emotions on the line, the first words out of your mouth should be, you're right or I'm sorry. And it doesn't have to be accurate. They don't have to be right, and you don't have to be sorry. It's actually okay if those conditions are not true. But those are the most powerful phrases for stopping someone from being annoyed and escalating and having a really counterproductive conversation. You know, if the PowerPoint story had been like, you're right, like that should have saved your changes. And you know, then my response would honestly probably be like, yeah, but I really should have saved as. You know, because now you validated my opinions, and now I feel like I'm no longer at threat. You know, now we can talk about real things. And I'm sorry. So it's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's not their fault, but now I feel better because you have accepted responsibility. And I have to say, like, I'm happy that in recent history, Microsoft has not done any of these, but we have seen some really doozies of corporate non-apologies out in the internets lately. My favorite one was United, when they dragged that guy off the plane, and the United CEO was like, we're sorry if the other passengers were inconvenienced. You dragged the dude off the plane. At no point did they accept any responsibility. It was like, we're sorry that this thing happened and made some people unhappy, and we're going to reach out to that passenger and see what was going on. Oh, the worst. If they'd just been like, we're sorry, we made a giant mistake. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. Like, they could have gone back to business as usual, smashing guitars and having delays, and no one would have cared. So we start with this kind of like, you're right, I'm sorry, and then you can have a productive conversation, because once they're like, okay, and they aren't expecting it, honestly, because vendors don't do this, so it's a really low bar, you can exceed it so easily. And then once people are happy, you can say, well, okay, so let's talk about what happened. You know, oh, I'm really sorry you lost that work. Geez, how could we prevent this from happening again? What could we have done to make this better? Tell me about how you do your presentation decks. You know, you were downloading it from an email. Why were you doing that? There's probably a feature idea there. For someone like me who does a lot of talks, some kind of make it really easy to modularize these talks and remix them seems like a really good PowerPoint feature. Maybe I should tell them this. So let's put these all together. We learned a lot of useful techniques. This is the point where I'm going to ask people to talk. So if we have some mics here that people can get up to, but also if you shout, I will repeat. So let's go back to our hotel room key. Suppose you're a product person at the hotel, and you keep hearing customers complain about losing their keys. Your number one feature request is people say, just put it on my phone, right? Let's do that. So I'm one of those customers. I have just requested you to put my hotel room key on my phone because I always have my phone. What could we ask to make sure this is actually a good idea? What should we ask me? What? Right, is your phone compatible with a door? So maybe what kind of phone do you have? You'd probably want to, that's something where you might actually want to survey, is like figure out, of the people who use our hotel, how likely are they to have modern phones that we can do things with? So that's a good question, technical capability. What else? Do you always carry your phone with you? Yeah, another good question. So in my case, yeah, probably. There's actually an interesting study that like 90% of people have their phone within 3 feet of them at all times, including when they're sleeping, including when you're in the shower. So I'm guessing the answer would be yes, but you never know.
Do you scared of phones?
Do you what?
Are you scared of phones?
Am I scared of phones? Am I scared of phones and technology? Right, how would I feel about that? So let's reframe that a little way. How confident are you that having your hotel room key associated with your phone would be okay? I'd be like, I'm fine. I mean, I'm on the side of technology adopter where I just assume all bad things are going to happen and be reversible. But that might not be typical. It's certainly not how my brother, the junior high school teacher, envisions the world. Do I have a lot of power problems with my phone? So when I'm staying in a hotel, what am I doing? Traveling. I'm at conferences. My phone is sitting here not plugged in right now. When I get back to my hotel room tonight, I guarantee you it will be at 1%. So this is, for me at least, fundamentally a terrible idea, because if I have no redundancy and my room key is just on my phone, the number of times I have been back at my hotel and not actually had a powered up phone is very, very high. I might be weird, so you'd want to talk to more people than me, but that is a pretty strong indicator right there that we'd want to follow up on. Anything else?
Are you okay with me putting this app on your phone?
Okay, so we'll get that and that. So are you okay with me putting an app on your phone? There's 2 ways to ask that. One is, do I trust Marriott or Sheraton or whatever to put an app on my phone? The second, which is going to have a little whiff of social desirability bias, I think, is, will I actually download the app? Which I will say yes, and will I do it? Most likely not. So that's an important one.
Maybe a question to ask is, what are you doing before you lose your keys? Are you trying to carry your luggage? Are you hurrying out to something? What is happening before and after you lose the key?
Yeah, so what's happening before and after you lose this key? What's the environment in which this is happening? So for me, sometimes it's that I'm going running, and so it's in the little pouch that I unzip and then something goes flying out and I don't notice. More often it's that I am at some sort of event where I have not brought a backpack, and so I have my phone and my room key and I set them both down on the table, and then at some point I grab the phone and I don't realize that I haven't grabbed a second thing. But I'm away from my room a lot. Yeah, I don't know what the commonalities are, but that's good to understand. If it's just running, there might be a separate use case. If people are trying to carry a bunch of things, maybe you just need better valet service. There's a lot of things going on that where you could solve it in a different way.
Maybe ask customers if they know what's the difference in how locks are working in general, and if they're interested to know how locks will change, since they will change from physical locks to application.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
Ask the customer if the customer would like to understand how locks are working in general.
Oh, do they care how the locks work in general?
And how
Yeah.
it will change when they will switch to this electronic.
Right. So how's it changed over time? Yeah, I don't know where I'd go with that. There's someone in the back who's had their hand up. Do I have kids? Yeah, that's a good environmental. So you asked about what I was doing. That's actually a good indicator right there. Yes, I have kids who pick things up and drop them, or who say that I want to hold on to the room key, and you know how that ends. And so there are other humans distracting me. Yes. Again.
Do you tend to use the pool?
Do I intend to use the pool? Ooh, yeah. You know what? That just that prompted me. That is how I lose a lot of room keys. At the pool or in the little pocket cup on the treadmill. That's where all the keys go, or that's like 50% of the keys. So yeah, those are other good things. There was someone in the middle. Ew.
Do you want to actually have a key?
Do I actually want to have a key?
Or could it be just something about your fingerprint or something else?
All right. So yeah, so here's an interesting one. Do I want to have a key? My first answer is going to be no. Why should I keep track of another thing? Which is why it's a good thing that this guy in the front asked me about my phone power situation, because my first answer is no, I don't want a key. And my second answer is I cannot be trusted to keep my phone powered on.
Flexibility. Most people have fingers, and not all of them have sensitive skin, so they use it.
Right. Right. So biometrics has its own thing too. How do you feel about biometrics, which be its own thing? And I kind of feel like, my fingerprint, if it ever gets compromised, I only got one set of fingers.
Do you need multiple people to have access to the room, or can it be installed on multiple apps for like the same room?
Yeah, so kind of feeding off the do you have kids question, are there people who need more access to your room? And to be honest, if you think about kind of a workaround scenario, the reason why this doesn't bite me more often is because when I'm not traveling for work, I'm traveling with my husband, and for some reason, he can keep track of his keys. And so most of the time, how I get into the room is looking at him and doing this, and waiting for him to get the key out and put it. So when I travel on my own is when this happens. So again, the environment gets really funny. So yes, there's that setting. Yeah. So, but to your question, yes, my room would generally need multiple people. So this app would need to be installed on multiple phones, which means that 2 people would need to answer this gentleman's question about is it okay to put an app on your phone, and 2 people or more would need to actually download the app and put it on our phones. Good, so back.
Can I give you a piece of tape so you can tape the key to your phone?
Would it work to tape the key to your phone? Interesting. That might be a good solution. So I actually have, I have a thing that you could slide it in there. So potentially, but yeah, like what's the physicality of your phone? Do you have a case? Can I slip something in there? Would you be okay with that? Yeah.
Problem with that is some of the keys, they lose their signal when you put them in the air, things like
Yeah, yeah. Demagnetization happens too.
Would you be comfortable if we took your picture and added it to our AI-based model that would give you the key every time you want one?
So could we add your face to this thing so that now you are recognized? Practical problems there is that depending on the color of my skin, we might not recognize me because our AI data sets are not that great, and that's not us, but everyone. But yeah, that's also a thing where, honestly, I don't care. But also, honestly, I was just joking that when I took my last passport photo, I tried to look tired and cranky and confused because that's always what I look like when I'm returning to the country. And I would just like the algorithms to be like, yes, that's clearly the same woman. So we could, if people have other ones, we can keep asking them. But 2 of the kind of starters that work in just about any context ever is like, okay, so you're telling me that you'd like your hotel room key to be on your phone. Just to make sure I'm clear, if you had it already, how would it make your life easier? And the reason you ask this is because lots of people everywhere ask for things where the answer is, it would just be nice to have. And this seems silly, except I've seen them do this a lot of times. Excuse me. If I had this already, how would it make my life easier? Well, it would mean that when I go to the pool and I come back dripping wet, then I'm not like, oh, now I have to go down to the front desk, and it's kind of embarrassing, especially if you're in your bathing suit and there's like a giant professional conference of people walking past you and you're like, hi, I'm the idiot who lost my key, could you get me a new one, please? Or you're carrying a cranky child or 2 cranky children, as I've done on occasion. No, I don't have the hotel room key, please give me a new one. So you can envision these cases where, how often does this happen? Might be a good question. But you can see that when it does happen, it's not Like, I'm just really upset when this happens. Like, it's not a minor, like, oh, I'll just go get a new room key. It tends to happen at times, like I am in my bathing suit, I have tired children, I have come back from a work event and I've been schmoozing all night and my feet hurt and I'm carrying my shoes and like, I am emotionally fraught at this moment. And so if you solve this problem, I would be really happy. Although it probably shouldn't be on my phone. You could also say things like, since you don't have it today, what's your current workaround? And when people have a problem that they really need to solve, they have a workaround. Like, it's just, if they don't have a workaround, it's not that big a problem. It can be tough to get at it because the workarounds are often things like the gentleman who asked if he could give me a piece of tape. That's a perfectly good workaround for this, right? I might be a little embarrassed to admit it, though. But if you're asking nicely and you're saying, and you've built up this trust, I probably will say, you know what, to be honest, sometimes I just tape it to my phone because that's easier. And then that might give you some insights into what you could do. Or I might say, well, when I travel with my husband, he just keeps track of the key, and I realize this is kind of a silly workaround, but it's one that works for me, so it's fine. I might remind myself, I set on my to-do list, I set myself reminders to not forget things sometimes. Silly hack, works really well. Getting ready to leave work, it's like, don't forget to bring your power brick home. Ooh, go back to my desk, I get it, now I feel really smart. So we should understand these workarounds because they give us a sense of how we work today and what's possible. And they also are a good indicator of, yes, I really need this, or no, it's just nice to have. And the counter, the sibling to it's just nice to have is, but your competitor has it. In which case, you kind of 5 whys them a little bit and you say, okay, well, if you were using it with our competitor, how would it make your life better? And again, sometimes people kind of go, would just be nice to have. Or they tell you, I'm using it with your competitor and it's amazing and this is what it allows me to do, in which case we need to also allow that person to do that thing. Maybe not by building a copycat feature, in fact, probably not, but by making them feel awesome in that same way. So that's pretty good. We got some answers here. I don't actually know what the better solution is for the hotel room key conundrum. I am pretty convinced, though, that it shouldn't be my phone because of primarily the battery case, primarily that I don't necessarily bring my phone to the pool. I don't necessarily bring it to the gym and put it in the little treadmill cup, so there's lots of cases where I just wouldn't have it. But when you ask these questions, the best way I like to think about it is that these allow you to cross off the dumbest mistakes that you are likely to make, so that then you can concentrate on making better mistakes. So you ask questions like this, there's a whole lot of stuff that you shouldn't do, and it's much better if you can get it off your list with 5 or 10 minutes of questioning, or even a few hours of questioning, than building it and deploying it and testing it or A/B testing it and then being like, oh, that was a terrible idea. So, I mean, I did actually I forget which hotel chain. I do actually have a digital key app installed for some hotel chain. And exactly the phone battery situation happened. I was very happy. I installed it. I got back to my room with 1%. And then it started circling while I was digging it out to put it against the door. The other thing is that the other reason why I don't really want to get a room key is if I fly in late, I don't want to go to the front desk and have to talk to a human because it's after midnight and I'm tired and I would just like to go to my room. But you can't do that because they have to see who you are. So you still have to go check in and show them ID, and then they will activate the thing on your phone, which makes sense because otherwise some rando could just steal my phone and break into my room. So it makes sense, but it also means that the experience did not feel like magic in a way that when it was promised to me in the email, welcome, your stay is starting tomorrow, do this thing, I thought, this is going to be amazing. And then I did it and I was like, this was disappointing. It's a lot of work to build things. We want people to be on the amazing side. And if all we can do is disappointing, then maybe there's a better solution out there. So all the questions, as I mentioned, that were on purple, there I have a document where they have all been excerpted out with how you can use them. So if you email me, I will send them to you, and please feel free to use them in your day-to-day work around products or around trying to decode your coworkers, because they all do weird things too. Because we all have cognitive bias, these work in every context. Some of these also work with children really well. I can say that not at all having experimented on my 8 and 4-year-olds using these things. So you can get these. I will send them to you. Please fill out your evaluation of this session, and for the benefit of all my other speakers, all the other sessions too, because we work hard and we want to know how we can make these better. We have about 5 minutes left, so I am happy to take questions or complaints. Oh yes, and remember what you did earlier. You wrote down why you were coming here. Almost forgot, because we're humans. What did you want to learn? So did anyone have something? Social desirability, it's okay to say it. If you had something that you wanted to learn that you did not learn, and you think that potentially I could answer, I would love to hear that now. I would give preference to those people who came in wanting to learn something that I did not cover. So please, you again, my gentleman up here.
Actually, I want to ask if Microsoft changed a bit more aware of perception of what you explained, because we hear a lot about improving efficiency of work for the customer, for the customers, and obviously, what about improving work for developers and looking into their workflows?
So is Microsoft doing this? I work for developer division. I ask these questions of software developers every day, and I would say that it's a big ship. It is turning slowly, but it is turning. So there's a good number of things where we have come in thinking that a particular solution was good. We've gone out, we've watched how developers work. We've come back and said, no, like there's probably something we need to fix, but it's not this. Is anyone else?
What about the tactic of putting yourself in the place of the user and trying to do that based on hypothesize from one? The example I think about DevOps and the approach for DevOps actually makes the doer be the user also and buying that culture. Whereas a lot of times we end up coming into DevOps team right now and we just ask the developer why are they doing that?
Right. So what about making the people creating be the users? It is an incredibly useful tactic, and I recommend it when you can do it. And also, there are times when it is difficult to do. So yeah, whenever you can put people into a learner's mindset and actually go through their own tutorial or try their own, send out their own mailing list mail or whatever the solution is, I think that's even more powerful because then we're experiencing it ourselves. But I think that's one of those things where culturally it can be hard to get buy-in. And also just the time involved in getting people to do this, especially if it's something that involves a new skill. Like if I came and you were like, all right, Cindy, you're going to do deployments now. I'd be like, all right, it's going to be like 3 days before you trust me to push any buttons. That's a lot of time investment. So when you can get people to asking questions, you can get to that faster. It also brings people closer into the middle. I find humans are most receptive to new information that comes from people that are more like us. So if you are a complete outsider and you ask some questions, it brings you in closer. If I interview a whole lot of DevOps engineers, I'm going to be more like you, and therefore you're going to listen more to the things that I have to say. Anything else? Anyone have anything that they would like to learn that you haven't learned? Or any questions?
I'm going to say, to answer your question, I was hoping to come here and learn how to de-bias my own perspective. But I've gotten more of bias, self-respect, my own assertion and ideas about how to build it.
Right. So yeah, he said he wanted to come in here wanting to debug his own. Yeah, I talk about other people, I think largely because most of us find it easier to think about those other people. But these, we're looking back inward at all of these. So, hindsight bias, like confirmation bias, I'm going to look for the things I'm doing. I'm always kind of practicing this myself. I'm a big fan of working with a partner if you're talking to customers or you're trying to debug like a process or how you're doing something, because they will often see things that you don't. So all these tools work on you. It's just harder because you have to be be mentally willing to say, I am terrible in all these ways, and now I will fix them. And that's really hard. Yeah. And I saw a hand over here.
Is it possible to actually induce these biases in somebody when you're talking with them, to suggest them into that state of mind?
Can you suggest that? Oh, no, it's a good question. And there actually is, there's a concept called stereotype threat. So for example, supposedly women are less good at math, And so if you take a bunch of young women and you remind them that they're girls and then you give them the math test, that they will do less well. Similarly, in stereotype land, Asians are better at math. So if you remind people of Asian descent that they're Asian, they will do better on the math test. So yeah, you can, by pointing out this sort of well, you're not very good at this, or you might, putting people in that sort of sense of, this is what folks expect of me, you can, yeah. In terms of getting people to say things that are not true in the other direction, these questions have been pretty carefully field tested. I've done this for a long time. So there are certainly things that will get people to admit to things but go too far in the other direction. So for example, if I'm positive, I have seen the quantitative data that shows that a customer is having a problem with this thing, and I ask them and I say, tell me one thing, what's the worst thing, and they still won't admit to it. Sometimes I will say something like, other customers have told me that X is a problem. That is a leading statement, and I don't generally recommend it, because there are a lot of people who will say, well, yeah, I have that problem too. But I will say that sometimes I pull it out as a very last resort. I am looking at the data. I know that you cannot complete this process. I think this is the only way that I will get you to tell me about it. So then I bring the, other people say, and then I ask a lot of why questions to make sure that it's not just they're not just agreeing because I set that in their mind.
Just a quick comment. I found a lot of times you touched on how to interact with the user and make them feel comfortable. A lot of the problems that I see are within the development team themselves, where one person doesn't necessarily want to affect another developer by saying, well, maybe it should have been done this way, or maybe this is why the users, whatever. So a lot of it's just analyzing our own biases, either toward our own code or toward our own decisions that have been made or the way we want.
Yeah. So just in case other people didn't hear that, oftentimes within a team, the people reluctant to give feedback are teammate to teammate. Someone doesn't want to say I don't really like this new stand-up process Cindy put in place because, maybe you like me and you don't want to hurt my feelings. Asking what's the one thing you would change, and having people write them down and then kind of pass your stickies to the center can be useful as well. So it's really hard to look at someone and say, maybe this thing you suggested is terrible, but if everyone says, okay, everyone, if there was one thing that you'd like to improve, what would it be? Write it down. One person collects it, they shuffle them up and then look. And then maybe you can see that, half the team actually hates this stand-up process, let's talk about it. The other is let's assume this is true. And how I've seen that play out in groups is actually a technique where everyone argues one side and then everyone argues the other side. And so it's not where you feel like I'm attacking you by saying this thing is terrible, but where, well, let's all talk about how this might be done, and then let's talk about this, and then make everyone go around the room and say a thing.
How do you avoid saying that in anticipation of promises to ask these questions? When you said, what is the one thing that you would want in this product? How do you avoid
Right, that's a really good nuance. How do we avoid making promises? So what's the one thing you could do, you'd want to change? Someone says it, they're like, this is the worst thing about your product. If you only change this, it'd be great. You ask the questions, they're like, so when are you going to build it? Usually at the beginning of the conversation, you can kind of preface it by saying, I'm really looking to understand what you need. I can't make any promises, but I'd really like to understand because this will influence the future. The other is, and this is not lying, is that no one's one thing is the same. And if it is, you actually should build it right now. If you talk to a bunch of customers and they all have the same, this is the worst thing, that should be your number one priority, is doing that thing. But if you hear from different people, that's where you can use that other people have told me to kind of a positive effect and say, okay, so it sounds like this is your biggest challenge. yeah, I can see how that's really, really, being difficult for you. I'm sorry we haven't made this experience the way you want yet. It's interesting because I've heard so many different things from other customers about what their biggest pain point is. So I need to take all this information back and figure out how we reconcile all these perspectives. I wish it was as easy as saying there was one fix. If there was, we'd be building it right now. Right? Because that's usually what happens, is that you talk to customers and there's a handful of things, and sometimes they're in direct conflict with each other. And I usually will admit to that too, say like, it's interesting, I've heard quite a few customers who say exactly the opposite thing. Obviously we can't build either because it would really disenfranchise one of you, so we need to figure out something that works for both customers, both sets of customers.
When you're doing a voice of customer, do you recommend doing one customer at a time or doing a group of customers?
Yeah, okay, so I'm sorry there weren't more people here to hear this. Do we do one customer at a time or a group of customers? I like one customer at a time. I really, really, really hate focus groups. There is one exception, and it's because it's one I use. No, there's one exception, which is if you are talking to a group of people who have a shared context and work together, such as like a cross-functional developer team, you've got your front end and your back end and your DevOps. If you have those folks in a room, then their perspectives kind of tend to feed off each other, and someone's like, oh yeah, that is a problem. Oh, I thought I was the only one. Oh, and you get a really good, rich conversation. When you have randomly selected people who don't have much in common, then you have the loud person in the room effect. Once one person says, oh, that's easy, no one wants to say that it's not. Or you'll have like the weird tangent person who wants to talk about, like the subway. And you're like, but we're talking about dev environments, and they just keep dragging it over there. And I like to be part of focus groups whenever I'm asked to one, because I like watching the train wreck. And I've been in a whole lot of like $50 gift card focus groups where there's just someone talking about subways or monkeys or something that's irrelevant. And I'm just thinking, you are wasting a lot of money. You're not getting anything out of the session. So it is tough. I think if you're a very good moderator and you've got all people who have a really good background, it's possible, but that's a lot of ifs. So one at a time. It doesn't seem scalable, but these conversations can be fairly short, 20 to 30 minutes, and you can do a lot of them if you're embarking on a big project, or you can just do like a few here and there as a sanity check. So a lot of times internally we'll have this team that I'm on now and other teams in the past will have kind of an idea of like, oh, I think this would be good. Yeah, it makes sense to everyone in the room, and that's always my job to say, now all of our customers are outside this room, so let me go have conversations with 3 or 4 people and just make sure we're not crazy, and then I go do it, and then I come back, and sometimes I say, no one seemed thrilled about this idea, but here's this other thing. Or sometimes I say, yeah, this aligns pretty well with what people told me. Let's go ahead and start speccing it out or prototype it out.
One last question. When we send you an email,
Mm-hmm.
is there any links that you could send us where there's additional material that lines up with what you just discussed?
I can do that, and I will do that. All right. All right, thank you, everyone. I'll be outside, so you can talk to me too.